Alrighty, welcome everyone to the daily market wrap. This is the biggest charts in 30 minutes. My name is David Zimmerman. I'm the founder of DeFi University and co-founder of thenode.pro. We're going to go ahead and dive in. Let's take a look here at Bitcoin. To start things off, BTC. Now, that really important level of resistance, if we just zoom out here a little ways, you see this level of resistance, it was support, this 74K level. This is the level where Bitcoin found support all the way back in April. So this was the tariff tantrum low for BTC. Now, when Bitcoin broke that level of support, it flipped and became resistance. And so we can see that if we zoom in here, we can see that Bitcoin did in fact find resistance at $74,000, just below that level of resistance. So with all that, where does Bitcoin go from here? Well, why don't we zoom out to have a look at the weekly chart for BTC, and let's just see what we see here. So my supposition is that this price action here corresponds to this price action here last bear market. My expectation is that Bitcoin ends up putting in a big move lower down to its 200-week moving average over the next couple of weeks. That's what I expect to happen. And I also expect, many altcoins should just get dumped hard. I kind of think that it might be something where you could call it alt-mageddon throughout the next couple of months this year. So I am short Bitcoin, and I'm short because it's a bear market. This is a Bitcoin bear market. And during Bitcoin bear markets, when you see a drawdown, if I grab my measuring tool, let me see over here. Let me grab that measuring tool. There we go. When you see a drawdown from peak to trough of only 52%, that is not a Bitcoin bear market. It's not done yet. There's still more room to the downside. Every previous Bitcoin bear market has been at least 70% on the downside. So if Bitcoin were to decline by 70% from peak to trough this bear cycle, that would bring Bitcoin down into the 30s. So we could be talking about, Bitcoin at 30K or something like that, maybe 32, 33. So that's why I've drawn in this level of horizontal support right there at $32,000. Now, will Bitcoin get down there? I don't have a crystal ball. I wish that I did, but I certainly think that it's possible. Now, the only thing that makes me think that maybe Bitcoin will find support a little bit higher is we never really got a true parabola this bull cycle. So since we didn't get a real true parabola to the upside this bull cycle, it makes me think that, well, we may not get real capitulation or depression on the downside this bear cycle. So I'm just thinking to myself that Bitcoin likely, now that it's been rejected at resistance, likely comes back down and tests its 200-week moving average before eventually testing 49K, which is the next level of support on the downside for BTC should it break its 200-week moving average. Notice right back here, back in August of 2024, that 49K level, that was important support for BTC. Now, if Bitcoin breaks its 200-week, that would be the next level of support at 49K. So it's going to be really interesting to see what ends up playing out with Bitcoin, because this is going to drive the rest of the digital asset space. So whatever Bitcoin does, that will determine what all other digital assets do for the most part. There are a couple of outliers, but very, very few of them. So I can think on one hand, the number of outliers that are actually performing well as Bitcoin has started to really, enter like it's still in the early innings of this bear cycle, I think, but it's March 5th. And the bear cycle really started at the end of October, beginning of November. So this was the beginning of the bear for BTC. And, so we're a couple of months in, and we likely have, if that Bitcoin halving cycle analysis is correct, we likely have until at least the fall. So the trough for Bitcoin should be in by the fall. And I can go ahead and mark that on the chart here. So if I just go ahead and take a look at maybe like the beginning of November. So usually Bitcoin bear cycles last for about a year. So that would mean that by November, the trough should be in. Whether that trough ends up being all the way down here at 32K, 33K, or maybe it ends up being 49K, no one knows. Impossible to know. What I can tell you though is that if the stock market really corrects in earnest at some point over the next couple of months, that would likely drag software down. And software is positively correlated with Bitcoin right now. So if software gets dumped even harder than it's already been sold, well, then it wouldn't surprise me to see Bitcoin test somewhere in the 30s. So that'll be an interesting level to really, heavily accumulate BTC at that level. Let's take a look at ETH. So Ethereum, you've got to view this through the lens of what Bitcoin could do. That's really the important thing when it comes to taking a look at ETH, is watching ETH through the lens of BTC. And so, number one, I want to take a look at ETH USD. This price action here. Now, notice this flag, this bear flag. So, this is a weekly. And the fact that we can even see this flag on the weekly tells me that it's pretty well defined now. Here's the pole, and here's that upsloping flag right there. So, bear flags are continuation patterns. And so, that tells me that if this pattern is going to complete, you might see ETH all the way down here at like $1,000, maybe $1,100. That would be a pretty good deal to pick up ETH at $1,100, the bear market lows from last cycle. So, yeah, I would definitely be a buyer of ETH in this range between $900 and $1,250. That's my buy zone for Ethereum. Now, let's go ahead and price ETH in Bitcoin terms. Let's just go ahead and price it in Bitcoin terms. That way we can, learn whether it's been outperforming Bitcoin or not. And, it really has not. So this chart moving down and to the right, this chart, this is ETH underperforming Bitcoin. This brief period of time here, this is ETH massively outperforming Bitcoin. So even during that huge rally this summer out of ETH, even with that huge rally, it was not really able to break out. All ETH did was just find resistance and get rejected in Bitcoin terms. So you got to ask yourself, if you're going to take more risk by holding ETH because it has a higher level of volatility than you would if you were just holding Bitcoin, which is the lowest volatility digital asset in the space, then you've got to be outperforming. In exchange for taking that additional risk in the form of the additional volatility for Ethereum, you've got to outperform Bitcoin. If you're going to take more risk, then you've got to outperform. And that's not what we saw at all for Ethereum this past cycle. So it basically just got back up to resistance and got rejected twice. So this is not exactly an encouraging chart long term for ETH. I am short Ethereum. Let's take a look at Solana. Solana putting in on the weekly here, putting in a really well defined bear flag. This is a beautiful bear flag. And so this is the pattern that you want to sell. This is a continuation pattern. So if the pattern completes, then what your expectation should be is for Sol to move from where it is now, right around $90, all the way down probably below $30. So that would be a completion of this pattern. Sol moving down below $30 or so. That would be a really massive move for Sol, but it's already done stuff like that in the past. Last cycle on the pump and the dump. This current bulls, this past bull cycle, the pump, and we're just seeing the last phase of this dump all the way down to probably $30 or below. So I would actually be a buyer of Solana down here at like $20, something like that. I think that makes a lot of sense to scoop up some Sol down there. And you might start buying at 30, buy all the way down to 10 if you get the opportunity to. I don't think Solana is just going to die out and go away, but really would want to get a good price so that all you've got to do is wait patiently for a good price, buy spot, and then sit on it for a couple of years. That's it. So that's my goal when it comes to these altcoins like Ethereum and Solana, and maybe a handful of others that we'll take a look at. Okay, let's go ahead and scroll down through the list. Let's see what we've got going on here. SUI, SUI. Notice a similar bear flag pattern on the weekly for SUI, not well defined though. So here's the pole, but the flag needs to be upsloping. And for SUI, it has not even been able to get up off the mat at all. So no upsloping flag here for SUI. And it seems to me that once this bear market rally fizzles out and ends, that SUI could be down here at 35 cents in a heartbeat very quickly. This is extremely volatile, and this is also a relatively new protocol. SUI, this is SUI's first cycle. So that makes me think that the lows from the beginning of this bull market back in October of 2023, that was the previous bull market. So my expectation is that SUI will retest those lows down there at 37 cents. And I would actually be a buyer of SUI in this zone between, basically I would probably just wait for like 37 or maybe 40 cents, something like that, to scoop up some SUI. So I am currently short SUI, short SUI. Here's XRP. So XRP, it's definitely got some support at this 200-week moving average. But here's the problem for XRP. Steep downtrend. And let's go ahead and price this in Bitcoin terms just to see, has XRP outperformed Bitcoin? The answer is no. And if we just go ahead and zoom out a little ways here, this is a weekly. It's interesting because XRP has put in a pretty clearly defined channel in Bitcoin terms. So you can see we've got the center line of this channel. We've got the upper boundary up here. I cut off these wicks so that I could just, anchor it to this wick here. And then you've got the lower, this, looks like almost a bit of a double bottom, maybe a triple bottom, something like that. But definitely have some support, have some resistance above, and just sitting smack dab in the middle. So that tells me that there's plenty of room for XRP to depreciate in Bitcoin terms over the next couple of months. Would not surprise me to see XRP lose a further 70% of its value in Bitcoin terms, from now until the fall. So I am short XRP. Let's go ahead and take a look at Arbitrum. So Arbitrum still turning up a little bit here. If we zoom in to this weekly, this is a really weak bounce, just about as weak as SUI's bounce, if not weaker. So for me, I would not be surprised to see this at just a couple of pennies now that it's broken down below that level of what was support. Let's go ahead and zoom in and take a look and see what we see here. I want to bring this into frame. So this level, which I've identified as resistance, notice the break. So this breakdown and the retest. So I've identified this as some resistance on the way back up for ARB. And then really the next level of support on the downside comes in for Arbitrum at roughly 8 cents, 8.7 cents. So, my expectation for ARB is that it will eventually move down here to maybe 2 or 3 cents. Something like that seems to make a lot of sense to me because, ARB doesn't really have much of a function. There's no real reason to hold this thing other than speculating on, number go up. Yeah, technically you can vote using it, but not really. What are you going to do? You're going to hold millions of dollars of ARB so you can vote on governance for the Arbitrum chain? I don't think that makes a whole lot of sense, especially if your investment is just bleeding every single day. So I am short Arbitrum. Here's Aave, AAVE. Now, Aave is a very useful lend-borrow protocol, but the token, really has been going through some controversy recently. And without getting into that specific controversy, the resistance on the upside, ARB is sitting at resistance right now. So ARB is currently sitting at 118. That is trendline resistance. Now, on a pop higher, it might be able to make it up to 132, something like that. But in order for that to happen, you would really need to see Ethereum bounce above 2160, and you would need to see Bitcoin make a move back up towards 74,500 in order to see any of these altcoins actually put in a decent bounce. So I am short Aave. And if we take a look here, this is the zone where I would actually start to buy Aave. Like at the bottom of this zone here, which corresponds to its bear market lows from last cycle. So last cycle around $50, that was an important low for Aave. I expect those levels to be tested again this bear cycle. I am short AAVE. Let's take a look here at the BNB. So BNB, this is the Binance coin. Um, now, again, this is a really well-defined bear flag. So many of these alts have put in pretty well-defined bear flags. Here's that pole. Here's that upsloping flag right there. And if we just zoom out, where does that tell us price could go if that flag confirms? Well, number one, it would definitely break down below support. Number two, likely move down to just above $200, which are the lows from last bear cycle for BNB. So actually the low from last bear cycle was down around 188 or so. So it would not surprise me to see BNB all the way down here, moving sharply lower. I am short BNB. Now let's say that BNB actually does the opposite and breaks out. Where could it move to? Well, right now it's just it's been turning up from this level of trend line support for the last couple of sessions. It's been almost 2 weeks now that BNB has been bouncing. So it would need to get up above 668. That is the level of resistance. A breakout above 668, and you could probably start thinking about, maybe 730, something like that, $730 for BNB. But at the end of the day, it's a Bitcoin bear market. So even if BNB bounces up to 730, and what type of a percentage move would we be looking at for a bounce like that? Let's go ahead and measure that. So up to 730 would be 12% or so. So that would not surprise me to see BNB move to the upside by 12%. But I'm short BNB. I will continue to hold my shorts regardless because I expect that it will just end up rolling over the next couple of months anyway. Here is Arrow. Now, Arrow is a reward token, and the expectation this cycle for Arrow is that it moves, well below 10 cents and potentially even well below 5 cents for Arrow, for that Arrow token, simply because it's a reward token, it's inflationary, and there's no real value in holding this token. So you don't want, when you're providing liquidity, you don't want to earn some random reward token. What you want is the underlying assets themselves. And there's so much selling pressure on this every day because, so many people, when they earn Arrow as a reward token, immediately turn around and sell it for dollars. The level of resistance on the upside comes in all the way up here at 40 cents. And the level of support for Arrow, so resistance above at 40 cents and support down below at 27 cents. I am short Arrow. And this is, really the position that's been hurting because of the funding rate on GMX. So always keep in mind the funding rate. Here's Fartcoin. So I'm also short Fartcoin. And my expectation here for Fartcoin is that it ends up going, if not to zero, then pretty close to zero this cycle, this bear. So my expectation here for Fartcoin is, you see this first big parabola that it put in on the way up? I would expect that 7 cents would be support for Fartcoin on the way down. But it's a meme, so it could go sharply lower. It could go, this Fartcoin token could, over the next couple of weeks, be trading well below 7 cents. That's actually my expectation if it ends up breaking 14 cents. That's the level of support right there. So if that breaks, I would expect it to make a straight shot all the way down to 7 cents. Okay, so we've gotten through Bitcoin, ETH, Sol, Sui, ARB, Aave, BNB, and Arrow, and just finished Fartcoin. Let's take a look at BitTensor Tau. Now, BitTensor Tau is a very interesting and useful AI protocol, but the token, at the end of the day, these coins need a mechanism by which protocol revenues can be returned to token holders. I believe Tau does that. It's got a pretty decent staking yield, but it's still a high volatility altcoin. And so that tells me that if Bitcoin breaks down below its 200-week moving average at roughly, what is that coming in at now? $58,000. If that were to happen, then I would expect for Tau to make a move down below 145. That would be my expectation. And for Tau to move at least to $90, but probably well lower than 90, maybe down all the way into the 40s or the 50s. And the reason why I'm calling for 40s or 50s on Tau is because that's where Tau was at the beginning of this previous bull cycle. So most of these altcoins look as though they're going to retest their bear market lows from the previous bear cycle. Tau is no different. I have no position in Tau right now, but I will buy it if it gets down to $50. Here's Tron, TRX. Now, the thing about Tron is that this one has basically held on to the vast majority of its gains this bull cycle. So I drew in a little bit of a channel, resistance above, support below. I can go ahead and remove that trend line now. And we've got the 200-day moving average rolling over for Tron. So look, Tron is just another alt. And yet it's one of the best performing alts. It put in a 7x from trough to peak this past bull cycle. But the interesting thing about Tron is that it held on to those gains. So it's only corrected by a small percentage amount. And if we go ahead and price this thing in Bitcoin terms, then we can actually really start to get a sense of the outperformance. So this, let me go ahead and draw this in. This move straight up like that, up and to the right, that indicates Tron outperforming Bitcoin. And that outperformance was, the majority of this past bull cycle. And that outperformance really started to accelerate at the beginning of this year. So big outperformance on the part of Tron. I would actually be a buyer of Tron if it's able to break down below 27 cents. Because, here's the thing, 27 cents is support right now, but failed 27 cents. And man, Tron doesn't have any support until you get down to 17 cents. Because if I just take my arrow tool here, and here's that level of support, well, if you get down below 27 cents, where's the next level of support? There really isn't one that stands out until you get to this breakout. So this breakout, that big parabola, this breakout here, that is now support. So it was resistance, but when it broke, this level flipped and became support. So on a breakdown of 27 cents on Tron, it would not surprise me to see Tron move sharply lower all the way down to 17 cents. I have no position in Tron, but I would be a buyer of TRX should it get down to 17 cents this bear cycle. And that would be a move lower. Let's go ahead and measure that. 40%. And that makes sense because most other altcoins look as though they're primed to enter just, altcoin heaven. It looks like most of these alts have like 60 or 70% left on the downside before they find their lows. Maybe the higher quality alts move to the downside by only 50%. Maybe in Bitcoin terms, they actually end up moving to the downside by 60 or 70%. But Tron, since it's outperformed on the way up and so far on the way back down, I would expect that its correction, this bear cycle, would be much more shallow. So that's why I drew in here no man's land, NML, because there's really no support here until you get down to 17 cents. I'll be a buyer of Tron at or below 17 cents. Let's talk about one of the real underperformers so far this bear cycle, AVAX. AVAX really underperformed simply because it's already put in a lower low than its lows last bear cycle. So AVAX is looking very, very weak. And this is actually, a pretty well-defined bear flag now out of AVAX. So if we just zoom in here, let's just take a look at this bear flag. So this is the pole, and here's that upsloping flag. So this is a basically a textbook bear flag. And if or when this bear flag confirms, pattern completion would bring us all the way down here to like $3. So $3 on the downside, that's, if we measure that, that would be an additional, in US dollar terms, 70% on the downside for AVAX. But I bet it gets even uglier if we price this in Bitcoin terms. So let's see, what do we see here? Well, AVAX in Bitcoin terms is getting closer and closer by the day. And look at that. Was that the October 10th? Yeah. The October 10th crash, AVAX basically underperformed everything else. I mean, it looks like it basically, if it didn't put in a fresh all-time low in Bitcoin terms, it got very, very close to doing so. So if I go ahead and measure this, let's just see in Bitcoin terms how much more downside. 40% more downside in Bitcoin terms just to get to basically the all-time lows. So the thing is that most other altcoins, we're not talking about fresh all-time lows. For Arbitrum we are, but not for most other altcoins. AVAX has been through more than, I think it's been through a full cycle, but yeah, it's been through 2 cycles. And yet we're talking about fresh all-time lows. That is massive underperformance. So I might actually be a buyer of AVAX if it can get down here to $3. Just because I don't think that this chain is going to just die. And buying it at $3, I mean, man, if it's able to get back up at, even on the downside during the next bull, if it's able to get back up to like this level of resistance at $36, and I can pick it up for $3, that's a solid 12x. And it would only require buying spot and holding. That's it. So I would be a buyer of AVAX at $3. Okay, here's Doge. Now Doge is a meme coin, and unless Elon Musk integrates Doge into X money in some meaningful way, I'm not quite sure what the future holds for this token. But what I can tell you is that it's sitting at this level of trendline resistance right now. So this is pretty clearly defined trendline resistance. And if Doge is able to break out, well, then the next level of resistance would be at 11 cents. I've got no position in Doge, but I do expect this to move sharply lower along with all other altcoins over the next couple of months here, this bear cycle. I've got 2 levels marked. The first one is the bear market low from last bear market. That comes in at 5.3 cents. The next level that I have marked is support from back in 2021 during the first breakout for Doge. So yeah, that comes in at 1.4 cents. So although 1.4 cents might seem a little bit far-fetched, it's certainly within the realm of possibility. Let's take a look at Doge in Bitcoin terms. So Doge in Bitcoin terms is basically already at its levels from 2021. So the fact that Doge is still doing relatively okay in US dollar terms, that's belied by the fact that it's really underperformed Bitcoin. And it probably wouldn't take much for Doge to be down a further 70% from where it's currently trading. Okay, so with all that, we have run out of time. I want to go ahead and just share the school community with you guys real quick. We've been going through a lot of options material. I'm a professional options trader, so we've been going through a lot of options material over the last week or so in here. Talked today about selling naked calls. We also discussed selling naked puts, and we talked about how you can be profitable by selling naked strangles. I've also put a lot of content in here in the classroom. If you want to build a DeFi and crypto skill set, well then, this is definitely the place to be. So check out DeFi University over on school.com/DeFi University. And all of this content in here that I've posted over the last couple of days about options, this is great beginner content. But if you really want to build a DeFi and crypto skill set, I would recommend going through the free courses here. And all of these courses have the same formatting. So 3 modules, lessons and exercises in each module, and all of them have videos and beautiful infographics. So you can go through the video content, you can play the audio podcasts, and read through the content. So really, really valuable courses, totally free inside the school community. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining live. I really do appreciate all of you for joining these live calls. And we will have our next daily market wrap tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Everyone, have a good one. Peace.